Where did Confederate soldiers go after Appomattox? When Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse in April 1865, the war was not completely over, but it was clear that the Confederacy had collapsed. Confederate soldiers walked away from the battlefield and returned to a country that had changed in almost every way. They went home without pay, without supplies, and without any real sense of what their lives would look like next. Some returned to farms or families. Some fled the country. Others kept fighting for a short time or turned to crime. A few threw themselves into rebuilding. Many just tried to survive. This video looks at where Confederate soldiers went and what happened to them after Appomattox. The surrender at Appomattox. The surrender terms that Ulysses S. Grant offered Lee were surprisingly generous. Confederate soldiers were allowed to return home if they agreed not to take up arms again. They could keep their horses and mules, which was a practical gesture, because many men needed those animals to plant crops and rebuild their farms. The official paperwork they received was called a parole pass. It protected them from being arrested by Union patrols as they made their way home. Soldiers left Appomattox in small groups, carrying almost nothing except the clothes they had on and whatever food they could find. For many of them, the walk home took days or even weeks. Returning to a destroyed South, most Confederate soldiers returned to farms and towns that had been devastated by 4 years of war. Railroads were ruined, cities had burned, livestock had been taken or killed. Many homes had been destroyed during the long campaigns across the South. In some places, soldiers came home to find their families living in poverty or relying on neighbors for food. Letters from the time describe a mix of relief and shock. Soldiers were thankful to be alive, but the world they came home to barely resembled the one they had left. A large number of men returned with wounds or illness. Many suffered from chronic pain, infections, or disabilities that made work difficult. They had no pensions and very little medical care. Rebuilding was not a simple task. It required an enormous effort from people who had almost no resources. Trying to find work again. One of the biggest questions facing Confederate soldiers was how to earn a living. Before the war, many had worked on farms that relied on enslaved labor. After emancipation, the entire labor system of the South changed. Plantation owners and small farmers had to pay wages or negotiate agreements with free workers. Sharecropping became the most common arrangement. Former soldiers who owned land would rent plots to freed families or poor white farmers. Payment came in the form of a share of the crop at the end of the season. This system kept many people trapped in cycles of debt. It also created tension between landowners and laborers. Other former soldiers tried to enter trades. Some became carpenters, blacksmiths, clerks, or teachers. A few found work building railroads as the South rebuilt its transportation system, but jobs were limited and competition was intense. For many men, poverty became a long-term condition. Rejoining the United States, some Confederate soldiers felt bitterness or shame after the war. Others felt relief that the fighting was done. The truth is complicated because there was no single way that former soldiers reintegrated into the United States. Many took the oath of loyalty required during Reconstruction. Others refused for years. Some welcomed the chance to be part of a united country again. Others viewed federal authority with suspicion and resentment. A few joined the U.S. military later in life. This was not common, but it happened often enough to show how drastically attitudes could shift over time. Moving west, a significant number of former Confederate soldiers moved west after the war. The reasons varied. Some wanted a new start, far from the ruins of the South. Others hoped to escape debt or avoid political conflicts during Reconstruction. Many of these men became cowboys, ranchers, or frontier settlers. They helped build towns in Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arizona, and Colorado. Confederate veterans played a major role in the cattle industry. Their skills in riding, scouting, and handling livestock fit naturally into cowboy life. Some took part in conflicts with Native American nations as the United States expanded west. Others lived quiet lives on open land. The West gave many former soldiers a chance to reinvent themselves, leaving the United States entirely. A smaller group of Confederate soldiers left the country. Some believed the South might rise again elsewhere. Others simply wanted to rebuild in a place that reminded them of the old world they had lost. Mexico became a popular destination. Emperor Maximilian, who briefly ruled Mexico with European support, encouraged Southerners to settle there. Several thousand Confederate veterans accepted the invitation. They established farming colonies and ranches. Some returned to the United States after Maximilian fell from power, but others stayed permanently. Brazil also became a major destination. Slavery was still legal there until 1888. Former Confederates believed they could rebuild a society that resembled the one they had known. Several hundred families settled around Sao Paulo and formed a community known as the Confederados. Their descendants still hold cultural festivals today, although the meaning of that heritage is complex and often misunderstood. These migrations show how far some soldiers were willing to go to find stability. Outlaws and desperate men. Not every former Confederate soldier resumed ordinary life. A small number turned to crime. The most famous example is Jesse James. He and his brother Frank had fought for Confederate guerrilla units that operated outside the regular army. After the war, they refused to surrender and carried out robberies, train heists, and violent raids. Their actions were influenced by a mix of trauma, anger, and the violent culture of guerrilla warfare. While most veterans did not go down this path, these stories became legendary and shaped how people viewed the post-war South. Other former soldiers joined vigilante groups and militias that resisted Reconstruction. These groups used violence to intimidate black voters, attack freedmen's schools, and challenge federal authority. Many former soldiers saw this as a continuation of their fight, even though the Confederacy was gone. Veterans organizations over time, as the years passed and the wounds of war began to heal, former Confederate soldiers organized themselves into veterans groups. The most influential was the United Confederate Veterans, formed in 1889. These organizations held reunions, published newsletters, and honored fallen soldiers. They also shaped how the Civil War was remembered, through speeches, monuments, and public events. They presented the Confederate soldier as brave, honorable, and loyal. This helped promote the lost causes narrative, which minimized the role of slavery and emphasized states' rights or regional pride. Veterans groups created camaraderie and emotional support, but they also influenced public memory in ways we still wrestle with today. Family life and community roles. Many former soldiers focused on rebuilding family life. They married, raised children, and tried to create stability. Churches played an important role in helping families recover. Communities pulled together to rebuild schools, farms, and small businesses. Veterans often became community leaders. They served as sheriffs, judges, storekeepers, and postmasters. Their wartime service gave them a sense of authority in the eyes of their neighbors. Some used that influence responsibly. Others used it to maintain racial hierarchies and restrict the rights of freed people. Their choices shaped the political and social direction of the South for decades. Coping with trauma, the Civil War left deep emotional scars. But the medical understanding of trauma did not exist at the time. Former soldiers described soldier's heart, a term used for what we would now recognize as post-traumatic stress. Many struggled with nightmares, anxiety, depression, and sudden anger. Alcoholism became common among veterans on both sides of the war. Communities had limited ways to help. Families often carried the emotional burden. These struggles remind us that the end of a war does not end the pain it causes. Growing old and remembering the war as the years passed, Confederate veterans aged into a generation with shared memories and stories. Newspapers published profiles of the old soldiers. Towns held reunions and anniversary events. Veterans posed for photographs in faded uniforms. Some men spoke proudly of their service. Others admitted regret. A few avoided talking about the war entirely. By the early 1900s, many Confederate veterans received small pensions from Southern states. These payments helped them survive old age, especially those who had lived in poverty since the war. The last confirmed Confederate veteran, Pleasant Crump, died in 1951. After Appomattox, Confederate soldiers scattered in many directions. They went home to rebuild farms. They moved west. They left the country, They started families, opened businesses, and took on new identities. Some chose peace, others embraced violence. Many simply tried to survive in a world that no longer resembled the one they had fought for. Their stories show how complicated the end of a war can be. Surrender is not the end of a life, it is the beginning of a long, difficult transition. The Confederacy vanished in 1865, but the lives of its soldiers continued, shaped by hardship, hope, and the struggle to adapt. Thank you for watching. If you want more videos like this, let us know in the comments. We will see you in the next one.